Hi, my name is Bill Schaeffer. Today we have another book review. Joan of Arc, a Horizon Caravel book, published by Horizon Publishers and written by J. Williams. In the 1960s, Horizon published a number of books on historical subjects under the publishing label of Horizon Caravel. I recently obtained a number of these books at a used bookstore, and they're really quite good. And the one by Joan of Arc is very interesting, although I've read others, Marco Polo and Searching for King Arthur and Caesar, and all the books are good. But this one stands out for me for a number of reasons. The book was published in 1963 and details the life story of Joan of Arc. It's illustrated, as we can see, with a lot of color illustrations. And this really adds to the story because you can see the image in historical perspective. And I like reading historical books that have illustrations. I have a better understanding of the story. The story of Joan of Arc is interesting for a number of reasons. It's a pivotal event in the 100 Years' War between England and France. And at that time, England had ravaged and controlled most of northwestern France. And only a small portion of southern France and Paris was still in the nominal control of the King of France. But he wasn't yet crowned the king, the heir apparent. Here we can see a map of France in 1429, and we can see how divided it is, and France is just the lower portion. And the English control all the north, and Burgundy controls everything to the east. Now, Joan was a typical illiterate peasant girl from Lorraine. And at this time, there was a fable or a myth that a virgin maid from an oak forest would save France. And apparently all of France knew it, and it had been a prophecy or a myth, folklore, for several hundred years. And at this time in the 100 Years' War, France was without a king. The rightful heir had not yet been crowned. And he was poor, he was indebted to his advisors, and the English were looking to crown their own king of France. The situation was desperate. Now, Joan was a peasant girl who was a little more pious than her schoolmates and a little more quiet and reserved. And so, at some time, she started hearing voices. And Saint Michael appeared to her and started talking to her. Now, in addition to the Archangel Michael, Saint Catherine and Saint Margaret appeared to her and spoke to her and told her that she had a mission from God and that she had to go and save Orleans. At that time, the French army was besieged in the city of Orleans. And if the English took it, it looked like they would take everything. But Joan resisted because she was just a peasant girl. She goes, what could a poor girl like me do? And so she resisted. But the voices and the spirits became more and more insistent that she go. So finally she set off. And the story is an amazing adventure of how first she has to convince the captains and generals in the army that she should lead the army, that she should talk to the king to be the Dauphin. Finally, she talks to him. She manages to develop a strategy. The siege on Orleans is lifted and Orleans is liberated. And Joan is heralded as the liberator. Now, she had three parts of the mission, and the first was to liberate Orleans. The second was to crown the king at Reims. And the third was to drive the English out of France. Most of Charles' advisors were working against him. and we're using him for money, and we're not that interested in him really being king or really succeeding. And he was kind of a weak-willed character. But Joan of Arc was very insistent. She generally got her way, and she always proved to be correct. And she was very brave in the battle. And the image of her with her standard and her hair flying in the breeze, leading the French troops on to victory, is a very cinematic and dramatic image. Well, I'll leave the intricacies of the story to you reading the book. It's really written very well, and it's a very interesting story. And another interesting thing about this time is about 1429 is like at the end of the medieval ages. And everyone pretty much just accepts that these saints and these angels appeared to Joan of Arc. And everyone pretty much accepts the worldview that the king is not the king unless he's anointed in a certain cathedral by a certain bishop using this special oil. The English even went to the extent of trying to steal the oil, because if there wasn't the oil, then the king couldn't be anointed and he wouldn't be the king. And they all took this worldview very seriously and fought wars with armies and defending the city to see that would or would not happen. Well, after a lot of intrigue, the king is crowned the King of France. And Joan has one mission left. And after this, they're starting to liberate various towns in France, but she gets captured by the English. And after a long, devious trial, she is eventually burned at the stake. And she predicts that the English will be driven out of France within 7 years, but really it's within 27. But what a brutal, brutal end to the story, where this young woman is burned alive at the stake, and her last words are screaming, "Jesus, Jesus, Jesus." And it's sad. And she is quite a character in history, and quite a romantic figure. And I was moved by the end of the story. But the peculiar thing is, it's a well-documented story, but it's total magical, fantastical story. And just 3 centuries later, 4 centuries later, was the French Revolution. And how France changed from the France of Joan of Arc to the France of the French Revolution in a few short centuries is really amazing. So one of the mysteries of history is the story of Joan of Arc. And to a scientific, logical mind, it makes no sense at all, unless there is some quantum mechanical connection, some hyperspace, super general relativity wormhole connection there. It's hard to say. Nevertheless, if you're looking for some interesting reading, I highly suggest finding some of the old Horizon Caravel books on history. They're usually written about historical figures, and they're quite good and quite full of information and easy and fun to read. And I especially recommend Joan of Arc. Thank you, and leave your comments below.